What is going on, Bro US History students? This is Mr. Bro, bringing to you a Regents review video on a very important topic in American history, in abolition, or trying to get rid of slavery. So here we go. Alright, so early abolitionism. Early abolitionism was mostly limited to a small portion of the population. Throughout most of early American history in the 18th century, so that is our early 1700s, pretty much the only abolitionists were free blacks, slaves, and Quakers, most notably found in Pennsylvania. So we talked about the Quakers earlier on in the year. These are people that are for peace. They don't agree with violence, so they're obviously against slavery. All right, so let's talk about Nat Turner. He'll lead one of the largest slave rebellions in history in 1831. All right, so Nat Turner, he is a slave in the state of Virginia. All right, and he leads a slave rebellion which killed more than 50 plantation owners and their families. All right, so this was a message sent by these slaves in Virginia. All right, he slaughtered not only the plantation owners but their family, including their children. All right, so sending a message that slavery was not okay. And as with virtually all slave rebellions, we're going to see slave codes became much harsher after these rebellions. All right, so Nat Turner's rebellion, unsuccessful in terms of he and the people during this rebellion, they were eventually killed and executed for doing this. All right, so just remember, every time that there's a slave rebellion, there will be much harsher consequences for slaves afterwards. All right, important that we understand that. Okay, William Lloyd Garrison, pictured here. He was a white abolitionist from the North. He lived in Massachusetts. He was the creator of The Liberator, which was an anti-slavery newspaper which lasted from 1831 to 1865. It was a weekly newspaper calling for the immediate end to slavery. So again, William Lloyd Garrison, an abolitionist from the North. He is against slavery. He criticized the U.S. Constitution because it was complicit with slavery, meaning that it allowed it. All right, so William Lloyd Garrison, important person to remember when talking about the abolitionist cause. All right, Frederick Douglass. Perhaps the most famous abolitionist of all, he was a former slave from Maryland, so he escaped slavery about the age of 17. He was an incredible speaker, supporter of women's rights, and a staunch abolitionist. All right, so one thing that we talked about in class, right? Frederick Douglass was an educated slave. Okay, that was something that was uncommon for the time, right? It was illegal to teach the slaves how to read or write because many people, those plantation owners, believed that education was kind of the key to freedom for many of these slaves. So that's why we saw many of these slaves did not know how to read or write. So Frederick Douglass was an exception to that. He eventually moves his way to Rochester, New York. So some local ties here, right? He's buried here, all right? One of the Rochester's most famous citizens that we've seen in our history. He was the creator of the North Star, which was an anti-slavery newspaper. All right, so in this newspaper, which was published in Rochester, New York, he kind of expressed his thoughts on slavery. Right? He talked about his own experiences during slavery. All right, and people really gravitated towards this newspaper and read it. It was very popular within the North. All right, and one of the most famous speeches that we looked at in class this year was his famous 4th of July speech, What to the American Slave is the 4th of July? All right, so we read and highlighted this speech in class. He's kind of talking about how the 4th of July is a very hypocritical holiday, right? How could we possibly celebrate independence, freedom, while we still have slavery going on and people don't get to enjoy those things? All right, so probably his most famous speech of all, What to the American Slave is the 4th of July. All right, jumping over to John Brown. He is going to lead a raid at Harper's Ferry in 1859. All right, so he wanted to lead a group of people to the federal arsenal. An arsenal is a place where they keep guns. All right, the government will keep weapons. All right, and so John Brown's plan was to raid this arsenal and to supply slaves with weapons to attack the plantation owners. So he hopes to inspire a massive slave rebellion by providing slaves with weapons to rebel. Ultimately, Brown and his followers were caught and executed for their efforts. All right, so he was unsuccessful in abolishing slavery. All right, but this raid really increased tensions between the North and the South and was a major cause for the Civil War. So you had people in the North saying, wow, John Brown, he is a martyr, meaning he died for something. He died for a cause, which was to abolish slavery. And then you have people in the South wondering, who is this John Brown guy? Why would he do something just like this to end slavery? All right, he's a threat to our society, because if slavery ended, we're going to see the Southern economy would severely suffer from that. All right, so we're going to see John Brown's raid is going to be a major cause of the Civil War. Harriet Beecher Stowe. All right, we spent a lot of time about talking about her in class this year. She was the author of the famous book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which caused many people to be abolitionists after they realized just how bad slaves were being treated within the South, right? So imagine, right? You're from the North, all right? There's not slavery happening in the North, so you don't really know what the everyday life experiences are. Like, how do they live? What are their working hours like? What's their food situation, all right? So what Harriet Beecher Stowe did, she interviewed former slaves and kind of put their experiences into print, all right? So something that no one really knew how bad slavery was. It was a best-selling book about slavery, right? So it was the second highest selling book in the entire 1800s, only behind the Holy Bible. So just to put that into perspective of how popular this book truly was. And with this book, it really increased the involvement in the abolitionist movement, right? So who wouldn't want to join the abolitionist cause, reading just how badly these slaves were being treated? Right, so major impacts. I would star and highlight this in your notes somewhere. Uncle Tom's Cabin, great piece of outside information that you could use possibly on a DBQ essay. All right, the Underground Railroad. All right, so the Underground Railroad was a way for some slaves to escape freedom up north and into Canada. So this was an organization that helped slaves escape. All right, so the people that led the Underground Railroad, they're known as conductors, right? A conductor drives the train. All right, so the conductors of the Underground Railroad, they are going to help lead slaves to safe houses. All right, so we had some conversations. New York is full of safe houses because we are so close to the Canadian border. All right, one of the most famous conductors is Harriet Tubman, pictured here. All right, so Harriet Tubman, she helped hundreds of slaves to freedom, not only to the North, but to Canada as well. Because we're going to see with the Fugitive Slave Act, which will be passed in part of the Compromise of 1850, right, we're going to see slave owners from the South are going to be able to come back to the North and get their former slaves. So Harriet Tubman, she's going to lead them out of the country. So again, those slave owners cannot find their escaped slaves. All right, so although she only saved, about a couple hundred slaves, Harriet Tubman became such a powerful figure as slave owners became very fearful of her, right? So they were almost on watch, like, could Harriet Tubman stop at my plantation and take a bunch of my slaves? All right, so Harriet Tubman, a very important abolitionist that you should know. All right, so let's do a quick recap of everything we kind of talked about in this video here. All right, so you got to know the abolitionist methods, all right? Know that there's a moral argument to slavery, right? People think it's immoral to have slaves, right? One person shouldn't control another person. Violence, we saw things like Nat Turner's rebellion, John Brown's raid, which eventually led to violence and ultimately the death of those two abolitionists. So we're going to see a lot of violence occurring during this abolitionist movement. Assisting slaves escape. We just mentioned this with Harriet Tubman. So just know that the Underground Railroad was created to help these slaves escape slavery. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. I look forward to see you back here for the next video. Best of luck this year, and have a great day.